Welcome to the Eat Your Content podcast. I'm your host, Rich Herrera. This is your home for all things food and pop culture. I apologize up front. I'm a little bit under the weather, but we're going to power through. But I feel like I'm in that phase of podcast voice that sounds really cool. So maybe it'll turn out okay in the recording. A reminder for everyone to follow me on socials at Eat Your Content and at Rich Herrera on all social networks. And also on your podcast player of choice. Make sure you follow along to make sure when new episodes drop. Today, I'm diving a little bit into the science aspect of food. Normally, my podcast talks about food and pop culture. And pop culture we're going to get to later on in here. But the science of food also fascinates me. I've had a documentarian on talking about the food supply chain and talking about those sort of things. So I'm happy to have Dr. Brian Kwok-Ley, a doctorate in food science, which I didn't know was a thing, here on the podcast to talk all things food science. Dr. Ley, thank you for coming on the pod.
Thanks for having me, Rich. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. So I do want to take a moment just to get your origin story, right? What was the light bulb moment for you that said, you know what, food science is what I want to dedicate my life to? What was that moment in time where that shift happened?
Yeah, I love this story because it goes through so many different phases of my life. The biggest one is that, I was studying chemistry as an undergrad, and I got pretty lost in it because I was really good. I knew my stuff, but I didn't want to do what normally most people do with a chemistry degree. Wasn't really interested in pharmaceuticals, not super interested in petrochemicals. Personally, I really was trying to do something that would connect myself with people. So I actually took a bit of a sabbatical off, and I decided to walk from California to Louisiana over the course of 6 months. So that's 2,000 miles, and that really shook up a lot of my worldview. And you're trying to eat 3,000, 4,000 calories a day. Food becomes one of those things that just occupies most of your time. And so it wasn't the full light bulb moment, but it definitely was a thread. And eventually I was kind of bouncing through different things. I was considering becoming a chemistry teacher. I was working at a research facility at a university, all sorts of things. But then I found a research journal about flavors, and I, like you, had no idea that food science was a field. And I saw that and I was like, oh my gosh, that's it. Like, I think I need to do this. And at the time I was dating my girlfriend who would end up becoming my wife. And we became like big foodies. Like, that was the one thing that we could always talk about was food. And we still do. Just literally, there's nothing about food that we don't talk about. So it just made sense. And so after finding out about that, there was a program, I went ahead and applied, and that's the end of that.
Wow. So, some doctorate candidates take a sabbatical, or some professionals take a sabbatical, and they're like maybe doing research or doing a pet project. You decide to take a 2,000-mile walk. That's insane. That's insane. So the food was like, you know what? I got to feed myself during all this. What makes all this stuff tick? So that's a fascinating story. Now, you said you and your wife are foodies. What came first, the science or the foodie? Like, were you into food before the science, or did the science kind of give the food scope and make it larger than it was?
I would say definitely I was more science than food growing up. My parents I think my mom did her best. She didn't love cooking, but she tried her best to cook for us. I love her cooking, by the way. But there's only a few meals that she could make. And my dad was the kind of guy that would take all the leftovers, throw it in the stew, and make a giant leftover stew. And it was pretty awful because it had like fish in it and noodles and rice and beans, and it was nonsense, like complete nonsense. He was a doctor, by the way, so he was very like pragmatic about his nutrition. He was like, good enough, right? It's got the carbs, protein, and lipids. And I'm like, okay, this is disgusting. But between the two of them, I would say that food wasn't a huge part of my upbringing. Although I always loved Vietnamese food, being a Vietnamese person. Um, and whenever we could eat out, that was the thing I always loved eating. But I was much better chemist than anything involved with food. So food was pragmatic. I just thought of it as like something that you got to get through. I love flavors, but I didn't know how to get it right. Like I was very clueless. My wife, on the other hand, um, so it's a funny story. So she's a huge foodie, and what she did was really remarkable because she's Israeli and Eastern European, and she took a bet the first time that we went out to eat. She said, maybe I'm gonna take him to a Vietnamese spot, and I thought, who like I really hope this is good because I don't know this girl. I don't know like what she knows in terms of food. And so we go, um, and I got a pho, like a Vietnamese chicken noodle soup, and she got like a noodle salad, and I take a bite, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it tastes like my mom's cooking, and I'm thinking, uh-oh, like I might have to marry this girl because how did how does she know what good Vietnamese food tastes like? And then, she calls over the waiter and says, I would like more fish sauce. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like like she's Israeli and Eastern European. How does she know? Like, how does she even enjoy fish sauce? Like everyone I knew thought like it smelled bad, it didn't taste good, so on and so forth. And I just thought, yep, I think I got to marry this girl because
Yeah, you found a
that's
keeper there.
yeah, got to keep her. Yep.
That's funny. That's funny. So you got your doctorate in food science, and I think I was listening to another podcast that you were on that you couldn't find a job in doing that, so you started your own business, which is the American dream and the kind of the way things goes. You know what? I can't find a job for what I do. I'm going to create one, and I thought that was a fascinating journey. So you actually own a consulting business. And you've worked with some pretty big names. Blue Diamond, I think, was the one that I most recognize. The other ones are like food conglomerates that as a consumer we probably wouldn't see on the shelves. But talk a little bit about what you do in your food consulting business. What function does it serve for these companies that bring you on, and kind of what's all involved with that?
Sure. I would say I'm like a jack of all trades sort of person. I have a doctorate, but like, my gosh, like it has nothing to do with like what I do on a daily basis. So, for example, yeah, I can't speak to the exact details of everything I do, but I'll
Sure.
take an example. We'll make a hypothetical company. They might reach out to me, and sometimes what they need is like someone who write technical papers. Like maybe there's people on marketing and people in the R&D, and they don't talk to each other. So I got to be the person who talks to both of them because somehow I managed to make a niche out of for myself that way. And I'll write papers, I'll write memos, I'll write sort of like different blog posts. Maybe they're trying to reach out to investors. There's all sorts of things where I have to translate stuff. It's basically I could take all that deep, dense stuff and turn it into something that like a layperson would be able to understand. So that's one kind of aspect of what I do. Another
Okay.
aspect is maybe a small business is looking to get into food, so they need a formulation. They need a product that they want to develop. So I'll prototype something. Either I do it myself or I bring on some contractors that I know who do really great work, and they pull something together, and I basically give them the thumbs up and then send it over, and it's great. It's great work because for me, I love the idea of being able to connect these different groups that normally wouldn't talk to each other, and I'm able to sort of create that communication between different people, the business side and like the people who are much better at the R&D and the science. And then the last one is sort of this one I like the most because I get to go and travel and visit restaurants. But recently I was able to go to a restaurant, and they were like, we need to do something about like our food, our dish. Like we're like struggling here. So I put on my science hat and I figure out, okay, what can we do scientifically to adjust the flavors? And to me, like flavors is such a important part of the food experience that, but it's so complex and so difficult to understand. There's so many factors that are involved. But I dig really deep into that, and I love reading all the research papers and technical stuff. That's my hobby actually. Like I don't get enough of these types of projects to make it worth doing all the work that I do, but I love doing that work because it's so surprising what you can do with flavors.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You mentioned part of your job is kind of taking these technical terms from the R&D and breaking it down into layman's terms, which kind of brings up the topic of the book that you wrote, 150 food science questions answered. I got it over the weekend. I was flipping through it, and I think you did a really good job of doing that, right? Breaking down the science of food into something that the normal person, home cook, can understand, and some things that were surprising to me that were, I don't know, what do you call, old wives' tales or that sort of thing. To you're thinking you're doing something for your food and it's really not doing anything. So if I read your bio, and if I read it correctly, the book wasn't entirely your idea. A publisher just kind of contacted you out of the blue and say, "Hey, are you interested in doing this?" So how did that come about? Was writing a book in your, I don't know, on your wish list, bucket list of things to do, or how did this meeting come around?
Yeah, it's funny because, and this happens sometimes where I have this list of goals that I want to accomplish, and that was one of the goals I wanted to do. But I was thinking like, oh man, that's gonna be like 5, 10 years from now. Like I will have to have experience. I have to like pull together a, proposal and get my chops in and that sort of thing. And so what ended up actually happening in real life was that I was volunteering for a nonprofit that's involved with professional food scientists. So they provide information for them. They provide support for food science students. And one of the things that they had was a blog. And so I started contributing to the blog because I was bored. I was a bored PhD student. You're doing your like research on the side, and like it takes 5 hours to do something, so you got to do something in between. So that was the one thing I liked doing, was writing. And I discovered that I was really good at it, in the sense that I was a terrible English student. Like I all my writing classes I was always awful at because I never understood academic writing. But this was just like, I was passionate about the subject. I could share about it. And the blog was really just like articles about the intersection of food and science in all different perspectives. And I loved that. I loved being able to share that information. And eventually I got really good at that. And then they sort of promoted me to managing. I mean, this is a volunteer gig still, but I'm like promoted as the volunteer manager. So I got to run the team. I got the like behind the scenes. I got to read all the metrics. I played around with search engine optimization because I was bored. So, I was really like putting all my effort into growing this thing. And eventually it just grew so much that the publisher found an article that I'd written, and then I guess they had that project on the docket, and they just needed someone to write it, and they already had like a draft and some questions, like maybe 75 questions that they had already taken from a general audience, and yeah, and I was like, sure. And it was in the last year of my PhD. So I was writing my dissertation during the day, and I was writing this book at night. And my wife, I'm so happy for her because she really supported me through all that. She said, no one's going to read your dissertation. Like, no one cares about that. But this book, people are going to be interested in it. And I'm like, yeah, I guess you're right. That is the opportunity here.
That's funny. I was on your bio and I did click on your dissertation, And I'll be honest, my eyes glazed over after about the first page. But then I read your book, and it's so easy to read and it's so easy to understand. You're writing these two things at the same time. Was it difficult to shift from the technical mind to the more layman's term mind, and trying to shift gears when you're writing your dissertation during the day and maybe the book at night?
It actually was really helpful because I really like the being able to sort of switch gears. Otherwise, I think I would fatigue really badly. Sometimes you're kind of going deep in sort of like the more, easy to digest content and information, and then it's like, okay, well, I need something, really, really to pound my brain against, and so switch over, and you spend 5 hours writing 3 sentences. Like, okay, maybe that's enough of that. So you switch back over. So it actually, I would say, in looking back, that was probably really good for me because it let me sort of kind of rest in between.
Kind of decompress a little bit.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the dissertation is great, but if I read one more Latin word, I might have gone crazy.
I feel you. I glaze over when I read my own dissertation.
That's funny. That's funny. So a couple of things in the book I wanted to point out, because I think these are common things that people do that I was surprised that it's not necessary. So, for instance, like cooking pasta, right? I do put it in a big pot, but I usually put some oil in there. I've always heard that oil keeps the noodles from sticking, but in your book, you say that's not really the case. Why is that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I also thought that you could use a little oil. So when I was reading up about it, it turns out that a lot of what needs to happen is just having enough water to sort of dissolve the starches at the surface of the pasta. And that's what's really causing them to stick. The oil helps a little bit, but really, if you can get enough volume, it sort of removes a lot of that stickiness. And that's what I learned. It's funny though, despite writing that, I still put a little oil. I think it's just my own habit. And I just, it's like a little safeguard. I don't know if it's actually still working, Ross.
That's funny.
My pots aren't big enough, right? Like I'm like, well, I don't know if I have enough water here. So
That's hilarious. Another one I read was when you're about to cook some meat, you pull it out 30 to 60 minutes beforehand. It's supposed to get the steak up to room temperature, so it, I guess, cooks faster, cooks better. But you say it doesn't matter for that either. So what's the science behind that?
yeah, I mean the temperature difference is really, really negligible. I mean, you be able to heat it all the way up to 400 degrees Fahrenheit and so on and so forth. The heat transfer is going to be fast enough to kind of get it up beyond room temperature very fast. So there's no reason to necessarily bring it up to room temperature. Now, of course, if you're defrosting something, that's a whole different story because it takes a lot of energy to defrost something. But the amount of heat that's required between let's say, I don't know, like 40 degrees Fahrenheit to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. It's really negligible.
Yeah, and I think there's some truth to that, what you're saying, because there's some trends about viral video trends out there now that people are cooking steaks from frozen in an air fryer and it comes out perfectly fine. So yeah, you don't have to pull it. You can cook it from frozen if you have an air fryer. So try that. So speaking of viral food trends, one thing we were talking before the pod a little bit over chat, and I thought it would be fun to kind of talk a little bit about some of these viral food trends that have become popular on TikTok and Instagram and all that over the past few years. And as a food scientist, kind of you tell me, are these worth it to do, or is it dangerous? Like, TikTok trends and Instagram trends tend to be a little bit on the dubious side, depending on what they are. I mean, I don't know what it is about TikTok and laundry products, but eating Tide Pods was a thing, and then I heard there was a borax eating challenge. I'm like, come on, don't do that. That's crazy. I'm not going to talk about those two. Those are obviously messed up. But these are some that I wanted to talk to you about that, it could go either way. And I wanted to get a food scientist, answer to some of these. So I didn't go over these beforehand. So these are all kind of off the cuff for you.
Ooh.
So
Great.
this will be interesting. This will be interesting. So we got I think 6 or so food trends that I wanted to cover. So the first one that I came across was olive oil shots. So olive oil shots was kind of popularized by Benny Blanco. He was on a Jimmy Fallon appearance, and he said,
olive oil. You take a shot. My friend Nino taught me this. These old guys from Italy came in. They said, before you drink, you take a shot of this, you can't get hungover. Impossible.
Have you ever heard of this?
Who said yes?
That's Nino. Nino.
That's me. Nino!
Nino, what's up, man?
Okay, we take it. We go
Take a
one.
shot?
Yeah,
One.
you go 1, 2, 3, bam. I love it.
That could have been fake, by the way.
Oh my God, it's spicy. This one's
that's a little peppery
no, this is
olive
like classy.
oil.
This is like classy olive oil.
Wow.
Yeah,
All right,
no.
now I need this one.
Yeah, now you get drunk. It's
Yeah.
actually just to get you drunk.
well, then this kind of translated into the food health influencer sphere, and now people are like, oh yeah, take a shot of olive oil every day. It'll help your liver. And now they're mixing like lemon juice and other things with it. So is this true, or is this harmless?
I would say it's harmless. Honestly, this is something that I've learned being in the scientific field. That apparently, the placebo effect is extremely strong, and like even with pharmaceutical compounds, at least 30% of the effect, 20 to 30% of the effect, can be trumped up to the placebo effect. And so the mind is very powerful in terms of, turning things around when it needs to. So I can imagine that, you're like, you know what, this is the thing. This is what it takes. You put all your belief into it and you go, boom, maybe I don't feel so bad about my hangover. So there's a lot involved with that. And then it might just be as, simple as, I could drink literally anything and feel good, right? Like, but here we are with olive oil shots. One of many different things that could potentially be there. Apple cider vinegar, maybe. I don't know. I mean, a lot of this is not particularly verified in the research literature.
So this is more probably placebo than an actual health benefit. Like if you feel like you feel better taking it, then take it. It's not going to kill you. It's not like
Right.
it's not like a Tide Pod. You're not going to die from it,
It's
but
the time.
you'll be fine. If you feel better taking an olive oil shot every day, do that. All right.
Exactly.
So that's good. So the next one is functional ingredients in everything. Like lately there seems to be a lot of, and I'm not talking about like functional foods, like whole foods, things like that. I'm talking about like collagens, probiotics. There's some things that have enough probiotics to like scare the FDA. Is there a scientific basis to have all of these functional ingredients, or is it just a trend? Are these things just like too much of a good thing, or is it just again the placebo effect and it doesn't really do anything? But if it makes you feel better by it saying probiotics, then go for it.
Sure. I mean, with in terms of probiotics, I think there's a lot of them that, it's very hard to verify their efficacy simply because how it's manufactured, the production process, how it's distributed, the temperatures it's experienced. The probiotics are really, really fragile. Like they don't love a lot of different environments, and some of the microorganisms, once they hit your gut, that's it. They're dead. They're not really happy in that kind of setup. So, there are a few known species, and they're really subspecies of microorganisms and bacteria that actually have a clinical benefit. Like there's actually clinical data that demonstrates that they do reverse certain conditions. But with most probiotics, I think it's a murky business. I think there's a lot of marketing involved. And then in terms of general functional ingredients, the one thing I've learned is that there's a pretty high threshold for how much you need to actually have a biological effect. And this is true both in the functional food space, in the skincare product space, in the anywhere where we're kind of like we're not quite a medicine and we're not quite a food. You can put something on the label, on the ingredient label, but the question is that like 1%? Is that like 0.1%? Or are we talking like 5% where we actually have a efficacious effect? That it's not just something to put on the label to make people feel better. And I think that's an unfortunate part of that trend is you can load it up, but you can only eat so much, right? Like there's only so much mass.
Yeah. I guess you slap a label on it has this healthy, functional item, and you charge $5, $5 more for it. So it seems to be more marketing than overall healthy benefit. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, so there are certain things that do work, but you gotta hit that mark of it has this amount, before it actually does something.
I guess it's kind of like the scare of sushi and mercury. Like, oh, don't eat sushi, it's got mercury. Well, do you have any idea how much sushi you have to eat before that mercury actually has a negative effect on your body? Like, you have to eat an ungodly amount of sushi before it'll actually hurt you. So is that the same with these functional ingredients and things?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Wow. That's funny. All right, the next one is kind of interesting, I thought. Dry scooping pre-workout powder.
Okay, so in this video, I'm going to show you guys how I dry scoop. For those of you that were asking how my boyfriend and I did it in the previous videos, I'm going to show you guys how I do it. So here we go. Okay, I also have the Alani Nu water bottle, but so you're going to need some water to chase it. Trust me, you're not weak for using a chaser. I do it all the time. And so here we go. Okay, you're going to want to put it on your tongue or at the front of your mouth. And this is how I do it.
Down the hatch in the dry scooping. Good, bad? I mean, inhalation, I can't imagine it'd be good for your lungs, but just overall, is it better for you than diluting it? They say it makes it more effective because it's not diluted. What are your thoughts on that?
That's actually an interesting point. There's a certain volume of fluid that's in your stomach, and certainly adding more fluid definitely dilutes it. I think it really depends on the component, but certainly anything higher with more concentration, like let's just say like a whey protein, it's going to break down faster just because there's more of it, and you use fewer enzymes to break it down. So, I mean, would I bet on it from a scientific standpoint? I don't know. I'd have to sit down and read if anyone's ever done that with patients, right? But certainly I could see the logic behind that. And of course, right, like, is it a choking hazard? Maybe, probably, but if you're fine with that risk and you're interested in taking dry powders, that's totally great. I think the funny story about that is my dad he would not take pills with water. He would just down the hatch.
Wow.
And he had a lot of pills. I mean, this is like he had maybe like 5 or 10 pills to take a day. So I don't know. Some people are wired differently. So if you're able to just like bring it all down, kudos to you.
So dry scooping, if you can swallow it, I guess you're okay.
Exactly.
All right, good to know. So this is the big one, I think. This is caught on recently, raw milk. There's a lot of food influencers out there touting the benefits of raw, straight from the cow milk.
This milk has been sitting in my refrigerator for close to 6 weeks, and it is still perfectly safe to consume. That's because this is unpasteurized raw milk, and raw milk will not spoil like conventional milk does. Let me break it down for you. Raw milk is a living superfood very similar to human breast milk. It is packed full of gut-healthy bacteria. To consume it, for that milky sweetness, you want to drink it within the first 7 to 10 days. After that, it starts the process of fermenting into yogurt. All that gut healthy bacteria starts to eat up a lot of the sugar and sweetness from the milk, and that is when the fermentation process starts. Pasteurized milk, on the other hand, is a dead food. The heating process kills off most, if not all, of the nutrients, so they load it full of synthetics to make up for it. Our bodies struggle to digest and absorb these synthetic nutrients, and that is actually why many people can't have dairy, but they can consume raw dairy just fine. And for those concerned about safety, please ask yourself, do you eat store-bought leafy greens or even pizza? You are way more likely to get sick consuming these foods. The numbers just are not there to justify all the fear-mongering. And many of these farms, like mine in New York State, must pass monthly rigorous testing from the state for cleanliness and hygiene. In fact, many large scientific studies have found a correlation between raw milk consumption and decreased rates of allergies, eczema, ear infections, eczema, fevers, and respiratory infections. And it also aids in recovery from antibiotic use with all of those good probiotics. So do not be scared of raw milk. Just make sure that you are sourcing it properly from a farm that you trust and get to know your farmer.
What are your thoughts? Now, you actually been quoted in a couple of articles about raw milk. So what are your thoughts?
I have a very strong opinion about this. And it really started because my wife and I, we moved from Wisconsin to Washington State. Where in Washington State, they do allow you to sell raw milk. And we lived in a small town where they did that. And I tried it. And, but at the end of the day, I was reading all the papers and research studies. There's a good one that Cornell University put out. My gosh, the amount of listeria that's in that raw milk is out of control. I mean, the risk is so high. And, I think there are definitely people who say, well, I have a strong immune system and, so on and so forth. Well, okay, that's good for you. But we're talking about like putting this into, a commercial supply and allowing it to be for sale. And, there are people who this is a huge risk. And I think it's I don't think it's necessarily professional or, I think there's definitely a lot of negative side effects to drinking raw milk. And I read the papers, there's probably 3 of them about the supposed benefits of drinking raw milk. Even those papers, they say, yeah, but the risk is really high. Even those ones. So, I mean, I think people have not read them. They cite them, but they don't read them. So I think, well, even the scientists say, like, it doesn't make any sense. There's definitely an imbalance. And a lot of it has to do with, if you can drink it, like, as soon as possible, sure, maybe. But it has to be refrigerated. It has to go somewhere. It has to go in storage, distribution. That gives those microorganisms a lot of time to grow. And these particular ones really love cold temperatures. They really love cold temperatures. They're not the ones that get inhibited by refrigeration. So you're taking a big risk.
So the health benefits of raw milk are negated by, death.
Yeah, maybe. And I mean, it's very questionable, like how much it really promotes your immune system. I mean, gosh, I mean, you might as well just be eating dirt. Like, I mean, I'd rather eat dirt than raw milk. I'll be honest. I'll do that. Like, I'll eat stuff off of, a tree and, because I at least know those aren't the microorganisms that are going to kill me.
Yeah, I mean, you got to think about milk pasteurization. That was a system developed for a reason, right? People drank raw milk, I'm sure, back in the 1800s or whatever, and a lot of people died. And somebody thought there's got to be a better way, and they pasteurized it. And nobody dies. Not a lot of people die from drinking pasteurized milk. So the raw milk trend, I would say, stay away from, right?
100%. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've worked really hard to prevent all that.
and I think what's crazy about things like raw milk, we kind of live in a world now where we're kind of in post-truth, so to speak, kind of conspiracy theorists. Oh, what are the scientists keeping from you by telling you not to drink raw milk?
I reject your reality and I substitute my own.
I myself know better than these people that have been trained and educated in this sort of thing because I read it on YouTube somewhere. And that's crazy. Like, I don't know what I don't know. So I count on professionals like yourself to say, you know what, raw milk is probably something you need to stay away from. And yeah, I mean, just because one person survives from drinking raw milk doesn't necessarily mean you have the same immune system. So the last thing in trends that I want to talk about is GMO foods. So I'm sure as a food scientist, you have a lot of knowledge about genetically modified organisms. I think personally, it gets a bad rap. I think GMO foods are perfectly fine. I think it's naive to think that any food you are eating today has not been genetically modified in some way, shape, or form. in its entirety. Like corn was never this perfect, yellow vegetable, right? And apples weren't always this perfect red thing. Through the years, things like that have been genetically modified. What's the scare that people are clinging on to about GMO foods? What is it that they are seeing in GMO foods that give them pause? And what don't we have to fear from GMO foods?
Yeah, I think and there's a lot of different perspectives on it. I mean, it could be as nebulous as just sort of like it sounds bad, right? Like that's always like those challenges where someone named it something and it just sounds bad. And that's to that point. There's things like nuclear magnetic resonance that had to be renamed as MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, because it sounded bad, right? Like you put it in clinical setting versus industrial setting, it's exactly the same technology. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, I think people wonder if maybe there are proteins that are being produced into genetically modified organisms that aren't supposed to be produced, or perhaps, there's compounds or toxins that, now we somehow managed to incorporate into that, and that's causing some kind of long-term negative effect. And I would say that's definitely something that we don't have to fear, because these GMOs do go through quite rigorous testing to ensure that they don't pose any allergen risk. I think that's, to me, is that could be kind of challenging, because there are certain, I'll give an example of there's genetically modified tomatoes that there's a cold resistant protein that's embedded into it that allows it to be transported in refrigerated conditions, so that it doesn't, otherwise it gets all mealy or it doesn't quite have the right taste, and so on and so forth. And that protein comes from a fish, right? So if you have a fish allergy, you kind of wonder, like, maybe that's being incorporated, but that isn't, because it's a very specific segment of that gene, and that protein is not the one that causes allergenicity. So there's a lot at play in terms of understanding how that works. And to your point, yeah, we've been sort of playing around with genetics for thousands of years. It's just that we did it in a really slow manner. But there's viruses that transfer DNA across plants all the time, and that's how we get things like different colors of tulips. I mean, but we didn't do that. Nature did that. Like, that's just and then we just took advantage of that. So we're always constantly playing around with genetics anyway. It's just when you put it in timescales of human history, it looks really different from the last 100 years, where we've really been able to study this stuff and really done a good job at sort of making things happen really quickly. Which, to that point, there are risks. I won't lie. I mean, I think it's very risky to consider, the types of things we could do in the next, 10, 20 years as far as synthetic biology, because there's so many different possibilities there, and there are schemes in which people could get hurt. I think largely in terms of bioterrorism, and like incorporate things in the food supply that's not supposed to be there. But that sounds like more of a malicious, actor rather than your own food industry. So that's it cuts both ways.
Yeah. I like to think in the good of humanity, but there are bad actors out there, like you were saying, that could mess up the food supply in that sense. But your normal food product on the shelf ain't that in terms of GMO, and nothing to fear in general about GMO. So I want to talk a little bit about the future of food science and industry trends. What kind of things in food science are emerging on your end that you've seen that, maybe we should be on the lookout for, of what cool things are on, like, with lab grown meat, like Beyond Meat and things like that are maybe on the cusp of being more consumer friendly?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the lab grown meat space, it definitely has taken a bit of a nosedive. There's definitely less interested in terms of the financial return, because, I mean, let's face it, it's a really hard problem, really big challenge. And I can't believe there were scientists that were willing to even try. giving up their academic positions to go into, startup space. And it's really incredible how far we've come. But as far as the commercialization, we're still pretty far behind. I think it will take something like, I think people have likened it to sending, people to the moon, right? I mean, it's that kind of level of resource intensive research, and it should be in the public space, in public domain. I don't think, as much as I love startups and I love the idea of entrepreneurship, I think patenting that kind of technology can be detrimental. So that to me is kind of that's a different story. But I find really cool and fascinating technology in sort of either fermentation or precision fermentation. I really love anything that has to do with mushrooms, and I think there's some really cool companies that are growing mushroom-based foods. I think it'll be a while though, because we actually, speaking of genetic modification, we're terrible at genetically modifying fungi, specifically mushrooms. We don't know how to do it. Like for some weird reason, they're really complex.
Interesting.
And we've never done a good job doing that. So like, that's why there's only like 5 mushrooms that you can get right at the store, is because we really don't know how they work. It's a black box. It is incredible how little we know about something that we've eaten for so long. We know so much about corn. We know so much about soy. We know so much about, tomatoes and watermelon. Like we have this vast knowledge. And then you look at the literature and you're like, okay, like we know how to move spores from one mushroom to another. Awesome. Like it's so rudimentary, the science. And I find that a really fascinating challenge, because there's thousands and thousands of mushrooms we haven't even explored. There's still mushroom species that we don't know of in the Pacific Northwest, especially in the Olympic Peninsula, because they just live there, and they show up every so often because they all live underground. So I think the future is definitely mushroom based, because there's such a vast amount of information that we don't know. And because of the complexity, I think it'll just require, more specific and more sort of knowledge gathering technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning to actually understand them, because they're crazy. I mean, I can't believe, I used to think like, oh, it's a button mushroom, like, of course, but like when you actually stare at it and you learn more about how they work, it's just baffling. They're alien. I mean, that's to me, they're alien.
So somebody can crack the code on mushrooms, huh? That's the next big thing.
I think so.
That's interesting. So to recap real quick, olive oil shots, dry pounding pre-workout, fine. Raw milk, stay away from it. And I do want to give you just a few minutes to promote any upcoming projects you got going on. What kind of things can people be looking out for, and where can people follow you on socials?
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, I've got my website, www.brianquilcalea.com. So just my name. And right now I'm taking a little bit of break, doing a lot of my projects actually. I'm trying to do new things. I spend a lot of time on Reddit though. So I have my username. But if you go to R Food Science, that I run that. Like that's my subreddit. So and it's such a great group of people. I really love working with everyone. But that's where you can find me. Spend most of my time if I'm not working. But yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of personal challenges of late. I lost my mom in July. Actually,
oh, sorry.
She got hit by a car. So it's been kind of a really challenging 6 months.
Wow.
So I'm taking a lot of a step back on a lot of projects and kind of reassessing where I want to move forward with my career. And I've actually reapplied to school.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I have a doctorate, but my gosh, I don't know why. I really like going to school. So I'm getting a master's potentially if I get in design, because I really love the concept of like engineering and art and bringing that together with food and seeing where that comes into play. But we'll see. That's still that's up in the air.
Wow. Well, good luck with that.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
I was thinking when you said I'm going to take a little bit of a break, I thought, oh, another 2,000-mile walk on the horizon there.
yeah. I don't know. My wife might not join me on that one.
Well, Dr. Lay, I want to thank you for your time and giving us all this wonderful insight about the science behind our food, which his book, 150 Food Science Questions Answered, you can find on Amazon, anywhere you get books, really. So make sure you pick that up. And if you're a home cook, it's definitely something that if you ever wondered, why is this not doing that? Then this is probably the book that you want to pick up and read. So, Dr. Lay, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Rich. I really appreciate your time as well.